ask me, who are your boyhood friends? I don't have any. I didn't have any boyhood friends. What was your boyhood neighborhood? I don't have a neighborhood. Because I never really stayed long enough in a single place to have a neighborhood. So those kinds of memories don't register and don't really mean anything to me. That's one of the things that moving a lot deprives you of, these kinds of memories of childhood.
Welcome to Somewhere Unfamiliar. I am your host, Alina, and since we are all new here, this podcast grew out of my own experience of moving around the world and realizing how exciting and also lonely it can feel to start from scratch in a new place, far from your friends and family. This is a space for honest conversations about identity, belonging, community, and the strength it takes to create a new sense of home. I really hope these conversations resonate with you like they did with me and remind you that you are not alone. Today's episode is about someone I've not only known but looked up to for many years. And even so, there were parts of his story I had never heard before. Dr. Eimad Houry grew up moving across countries and continents from a very young age and spent much of his life as a study abroad student himself. That experience is what eventually led him to create similar opportunities for students when he became a professor. He spent decades at Mercer University building the first study abroad and international affairs programs, experiences that really shaped how students saw the world and what they chose to do after. He also recently co-wrote a book on this exact topic. What stayed with me from this conversation wasn't just everything he's accomplished, it was how open and honest he was about his own experience. He's not necessarily an outgoing person, which adds a really interesting perspective. He's also one of the reasons I ended up staying at the university, so this conversation felt very full circle for me. Dr. Houry, thank you so much for joining me today. We've known each other for about 20 years, if I'm calculating correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And despite having known you for that long, I feel like I don't know that much about you. We've discussed this, but you are a man of few words, but you've always been there for your students, helping us throughout our darkest moments. So thank you on behalf of all of your students. I know that you're from Lebanon and you ended up in the US teaching at a university for many years, but I'd like to start off with the book you recently co-wrote, How Studying Abroad Changed My Life.
Changed my life.
I want to ask you why you chose that topic and title, and also decided to make a really bold statement that studying abroad can change your life.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Alina. It's a pleasure to be with you. We have known each other for a very long time, and I was really excited about your idea when you shared it with me the first time. So I've been looking forward to this chat that we're having. Yeah, the book, the title sounds like a cliche, and it's not a coincidence because the publisher insisted on this cliche. It's not the title that we were going to go with as the authors, but the publisher in their infinite wisdom decided that the book would sell much better if it had an easier, more memorable kind of title. But the message is still very much on target, and that is for the average American student that goes abroad, it is really and truly a life-changing experience if they make full use of the opportunities that are presented to them during that time. Especially at the institution where I was teaching at Mercer University, most students had never left the United States. And so going abroad for a significant period of time, typically 2 to 3 months, really meant that it gave them a whole new perspective, a whole new outlook on the way that other people in other parts of the world shape their own values, relationships, outlooks on the cultures of other places around the world, and so on. So there's infinite possibilities for learning, and that's why I have been pushing it very incessantly ever since I arrived at Mercer. And it has really and truly led to the kinds of effects I was hoping that it would have.
While you were taking students abroad and spending years doing that, you decided that it would be a good idea to kind of record all of the great experiences that everyone had.
Yeah, as you noted in your introduction, I myself was once an international student. I came from abroad, and it was not the easiest of experiences. It was because I transitioned in 2 different places, actually. I studied in the UK first, and I did my O-levels there. And then I moved from the UK to the United States to start my undergraduate studies in the US. So I know the sort of the challenges that are involved in making that transition, but I also know that those experiences really formed me and shaped me and greatly informed my life decisions. So I know that this can have a very significant impact on people. And so when I first arrived at Mercer, our study abroad office was very limited. No program at the university required that students go abroad. Even though, even back then, the hallmark of like an elite institution, one of the distinguishing characteristics that they had is that a very large percentage of their students study abroad, anywhere between 90 to 100%. But I noticed that no program at Mercer had that kind of requirement or even opportunity. Mine was the first program to actually require study abroad in the history of Mercer University. Every single program I've introduced at Mercer required study abroad, with no exception, because of the intrinsic value that I believe that experience has in not only impacting the education of the student, but also the life of the student, because that impact lingers on even after they graduate, long after they graduate, in terms of their postgraduate degree pursuits, their career pursuits, their leadership posts. All of that is documented and proven to show that study abroad can really boost your accomplishments in all of those arenas.
I didn't know that these elite universities required study abroad, and you require it in every one of your programs. So what do you think it is exactly that people get from study abroad? I'm sure there's a range of things, but maybe a few of them.
Not all study abroad experiences are created equally, and not all students are a good fit for study abroad. So typically when you require something, of course, that means everybody in the program has to do it. But then typically my advice to those students will vary from location to location and student to student in terms of where I think they can cope well. So for a student that I know who's not very serious, for example, and needs to like complete their study abroad requirement, I typically honestly would say, go to the UK, go to London, or, do something like that. It's like, I don't know, it's like going to Atlanta or something, it's just like, it's not very strange. It's not very different. The accent is different, but everything else is going to look familiar, sound familiar, and it's not that big a transition. But if somebody is really serious and is like looking to learn and to explore and to sort of fully immerse themselves in the cultures of other parts of the world, then I'll suggest Hong Kong, or I'll suggest Morocco, or I'll suggest South Korea, or something really kind of out of the sort of domain of familiarity for most Americans. And so the requirement is not so much like across the board, like for everyone will have the same experience, and that's kind of the uniqueness of it. These elite institutions that I mentioned encourage, if not require, study abroad. Like for example, Emory requires study abroad twice, not once. Once in your freshman year and once in your junior year. So I think the impetus behind that kind of requirement is the intrinsic value of the experience, because it's a holistic experience. It's a transformative experience. It's not just about going to classes and reading books and studying and taking exams, but it's about discipline. It's about developing social skills to be able to deal with people who are different than you, to be able to have the courage. Really, it takes a lot of courage to go abroad, to have the courage to like learn the ways of another country, to figure out the basics of everyday life, because it's not that easy. We take things for granted where we grow up because we grew up there and everything looks natural. But when you go abroad and you have to start from like the ground up, everything is new, and you really test yourself on so many levels. And many times you surprise yourself just how adept you are to like being able to cope with those challenges. So I think that's part of the impetus for that requirement. And also the fact that you are exposed to different domains of knowledge elsewhere. Say you're studying like environmental studies and you're taking a course on climate change or something like that. The way that it's taught in the United States is not going to be the same way that it's taught in let's say France or in Sweden or in Hong Kong. The people that you're going to have conversations with about climate change in those countries are also going to be very different than the people you're going to have conversations with outside the classroom. So there's a whole lot of learning happening outside the classroom as well as inside the classroom. So I think, the richness and the depth of these experiences is what makes these institutions really strongly committed to the idea that study abroad is an integral part of being prepared to deal with the real world, regardless of what field of study you happen to be in, whether it's biology or sociology, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, you're going to have to be a person of the world, and you need to know how to deal with people who are different than you are.
Yeah, I think that's really important, being able to deal with people that are different than you are, especially if people are going into fields like being a doctor or a lawyer or pretty much any field where you're dealing with a lot of different people all the time. And with the amount of immigration that's happening around the world, you're definitely going to meet so many different types of people. So I do 100% agree with the study abroad. And it's also like a mini move where you're kind of testing it out, but you can always come back, which is very different from fully having to give up and move. But it's like dipping your toes in the water.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yeah, over the course of my career, I had not that many, but a few students essentially who made a habit out of it. They did study abroad once and got hooked. And so they decided that while they were still full-time students and getting scholarships, money, and things like that, that they would try to take advantage of it maybe twice or three times before they graduated. So they can have a variety of experiences, not just in one country, but different locations before they graduated. So for a few people, I would say probably less than 10%. Doing it multiple times was like probably the most exciting part of their undergraduate career.
That actually is a perfect segue to my next question, because I'm wondering what the difference is between students that have this inherent curiosity to travel and those that don't. Because you did say for the few, 10%.
Yeah.
What is the difference?
That's a really great question. And I don't have the right answer to it or the complete answer to it, because the students that come to mind is immediately that I'm thinking about who did these multiple excursions, basically. A few of them you could predict that they would do that, because they were like, they had traveled before, they had been to different countries before, and they were really sort of strong academically and wanted to get as much of those experiences or as many of those kinds of experiences as possible before they graduated. So even when they are off, typically like in the summer, they're also like traveling. But then there are a few students who had never left the country before and did the first study abroad and thought, man, this was wonderful. This is great. I have so many memories. I've made so many friends. I just loved everything about that experience. I want to do this again. And then I want to do this again. But I really don't know what character trait or I can't put a finger on it, because I'm thinking of these two students in particular who are really shy. And I never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that they would be begging to go somewhere else, like the second time around, and one of them the third time around, because it was a struggle to get them to take an interest the first time, because they were really intimidated and they had families that were very worried about them, because, the typical parent essentially thinks that going abroad is inherently risky. Anytime you leave the United States, somehow you're in danger or you're at risk. And so I've had many, many calls from parents over the years basically expressing those worries and concerns about the welfare of their kids. This is just a segue, but it only happened once to my knowledge, but there was this student who was really, really eager to do study abroad. And because she was an immigrant herself, I had basically given her an exemption. Like, you don't really have to do it if you don't want to, but I really urge you to do it. And she really wanted to do it. And she was like scheming and plotting to like figure out a way to convince her parents to let her to do it. Finally, you know what she did? She did a PowerPoint presentation to her parents. She put together like a collection of pictures and testimonies from other students in the program and me to convince them to let her go. And they did.
It's dedication.
Yeah.
Having talked to so many people, it's just interesting. Some people are just more curious than others.
I
And
think so. I think that's the bottom line.
I keep wondering, like, are we born with it? Is it something our parents ingrain in us somehow? But I feel like you could develop it. Somebody could ignite that fire in you. Somebody could tell you a story about some cool adventure that they did. And then suddenly you're thinking, maybe I want to do this.
I'm sure now that they're in university and they understand the value of study abroad, finally, the value of like traveling and experiencing other parts of the world hits home. In more ways than they had previously given any thought to.
Yeah, I do think parents have a big role to play because I have my husband's friend never traveled, but he moved to Canada. Now he lives in Australia. And I actually did ask him, I was like, I'm not sure I understand why you decided to leave, because it doesn't seem like you were traveling around that much before. Was it your parents or something? He said, my mom always said that the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want. Right. She was always curious about other cultures, and I ended up being very curious about other cultures, and they basically put no limits on him.
That also lends itself to my own background in terms of my own family, born in Kuwait, raised for a few years in Lebanon, then moving to Dubai, then moving to London, then moving to the US, then going to Canada for grad school, then coming back to the US, then marrying an Arubian. I mean, it's just, the travel bug, I guess you could say, the travel element has always been an integral part of who I am as an individual, and my family too. Every member of my family has traveled extensively. Even though my dad, I mean, he had left Lebanon to work in Dubai and Kuwait, but those are the only two places he'd ever been. But still, he left at a very young age as a person, and also that kind of really instilled the love of travel in us. And there's also the sort of involuntary part. We shouldn't romanticize it all the time.
For sure.
We're Lebanese, and we had to flee the country because there was a 17-year civil war, and there was no way to go back to Lebanon, no matter how much we wanted to.
Having lived in the Middle East, a lot of Lebanese people do live in the UAE and left when their parents were young and started businesses in the UAE to try and build a life for themselves because of the political situation in Lebanon. So tell me, where were you born? And then a little bit more about that moving around based on your parents until you decided to make the move yourself.
I was born in Kuwait. My dad was living in Kuwait at that time, working for a food supply company. And so my mom was visiting and decided to stay a little bit longer than she had intended originally. And in the process, delivered a little earlier than she was expecting as well. So I was born in Kuwait as a result.
Okay.
But because my dad was not in a position to fund, support the entire family, decided to stay in Kuwait for a few years with him. And I stayed. I stayed the first 4 years of my life in Kuwait. And then at the age of 5, I was taken to Lebanon. And I lived in Lebanon for 6 years, something like that. And then from there, again, no intention to move to Dubai. We went to visit my dad, and the civil war broke out while we were visiting in Dubai. So in the final analysis, we decided that it's not safe to go back, and the rest is history, as they say. We stayed in Dubai until it was time for me to get into high school. And at that time, schooling and the school system in Dubai was very mediocre, I guess you could say. This is between 1976, 1977. So Dubai is like a shadow of the Dubai that it is now.
I want to say just desert, but I don't want
mostly
to be
desert,
mean.
exactly. No, it's mostly desert, because I remember the so-called high-rise building that we lived in was 4 stories long, and there was nothing around it other than desert. Very different kind of Dubai.
Wow.
So the schools left a lot to be desired. So my dad decided to send me to London, where my brother was studying. To do my high school over there. After finishing London in my high school, I then transitioned to the U.S. because to my dad, the dollar was a lot cheaper than the pound. And going to the U.S. financially made a lot more sense for me to get my undergraduate education. I had to go to private schools because my English was terrible. And That's the only school that would accept me, essentially, because I'm paying a lot of money, so they don't care how bad your English is. But I tried to get into the government schools, but they would not let me in because my English was just not up to the standard that is required to function.
You moved not only countries, but continents.
Continents, yep.
I want to know if you remember what it was like to have to start over and over again as a kid.
There are two things that I want to talk about that I think have become very clear as I have gotten older in terms of consequences that did not really materialize, at least not consciously, until much later. One of them is ask me, who are your boyhood friends? I don't have any. I didn't have any boyhood friends. What was your boyhood neighborhood? I don't have a neighborhood because I never really stayed long enough in a single place to have a neighborhood. So those kinds of memories don't register and don't really mean anything to me, because if I go to Lebanon now, it's like as strange a country to me as going to Nepal for the first time or something like that. I don't really know anything about the country. If I go back to the area where I spent the first 5 years of my life in Lebanon, between the ages of 5 and 10, I won't recognize anything. There was a person that bumped into my mom not too long ago in Lebanon, and apparently he remembered me and asked how I was, and then my mom told me that he asked and told me his name, and it was like it's the first time I've ever heard that name in my life. Completely unfamiliar to me. And he told her that we were very close. We used to play together. We used to spend a lot of time together. So that's one of the things that moving a lot essentially deprives you of, are these kinds of memories of childhood. That's why I have very poor memory of my childhood. I don't really remember a whole lot. And I think part of it is because it didn't get anchored anywhere, like it was kind of floating, moving on from A to B to C to D, and it wasn't long enough in a single place for it to kind of just settle.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is you also lose loyalty to places. Like right now, you ask me, where would you love to live? I don't know. I don't really have a place I'd love to live. I don't really have a loyalty to any one particular place, because I think the loyalty comes from also having like memories and also people that you associate with that space or with that location. And that doesn't exist for me.
That is so interesting that you said that, because it has just opened up why I'm like that. I couldn't figure out the word for how I feel. And I think it's loyalty to a country. I've interviewed someone that lived in their country for 20 plus years, goes back, and family lives there. They grew up there. They went to university there, and then they moved to the US, and they still have this like guilt. That's something I do explore with guests is, the guilt of leaving your home country behind.
Exactly.
And people do feel it. And from my husband, I know the loyalty he has to his country. I've barely ever experienced that. Maybe because I haven't been around so many people that have only lived in one country and moved when they were about 30 or 25, or like after all those formidable years. And, sometimes people ask me, or he asks me, like, where would you love to go? Or what would you love to see? Or where would you love to live? And I actually don't have an answer. I'm not attached to any place. I don't have any place to go home to. We can move wherever you want. I don't mind.
This place is as good as any.
Do you wish you had that? Are you happy with the way it turned out?
It's a really good question. I never really thought of it in terms of good or bad, or, sort of a benefit or loss kind of thing. It's just that a lot students always ask me for many, many years, like, where are you going to say? Because they know about my travels, they know, places I've been and so forth. And I always struggled with that question, but I always had an answer. And I thought I needed to give them an answer because it was just the right thing to do to kind of make them feel better about themselves. And so I always answered Aruba. I would love to go and settle in Aruba, but I really never wanted to go settle in Aruba. But I just say, because it sounds exotic, romantic, who wouldn't want to settle in Aruba?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I really never kind of evaluated it as good or bad. It was just that I just don't feel that way about a particular place. I love Aruba. I'd love to visit Aruba. Living in Aruba would not be the most terrible thing either, but it's not something I long to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, having no loyalty to any country and moving around so much. At the very beginning, you mentioned one of the reasons you started study abroad and wrote the book is because you were once an international student yourself, and there are a lot of challenges that come with that.
Right.
I'm wondering what those challenges have been for you. And maybe I'll add that I feel like those that don't have a loyalty to a country and don't feel like they really belong anywhere, there's likely more loneliness going on.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most recurrent complaints I hear from students about going to study abroad is the difficulty of making friends and like having a social circle of people around you to interact with and the amount of time they spend by themselves. And especially, the ones who are leaning more towards being shy and sort of recluse on their own. That problem, I think, is accentuated or exaggerated even when you go abroad because the barrier of making friendships and acquaintances abroad is even higher given the language and the cultural differences that exist. I guess I could, in terms of my own experience, two things I can say. One of them is when we moved to Dubai, it was really, really lonely because at that time, Dubai is very hot. And so there's no such thing as playing outside. And coming from Lebanon, playing outside was like the only thing you could do is because there was no other form of entertainment. You go on the streets and you find whatever you can find and you make a game out of it. But in Dubai, there's no such thing. Everything was car-based. If you want to do anything, you have to go to a club or, you have to make arrangements with like a particular facility to do that. And we didn't have the money for me to do things like that. So it was school and home and school. And so the unintended effect of that was that I spent a lot of time watching TV and learning English as a result of that. So here goes, free education. So yeah. When I went to London, I went to a private boarding school and it was full of international students, like from all over the world, but also full of very spoiled, rich international students. And the things that they talked about doing and the things that they talked about wanting and spending money on, I just could not even dream of because I just didn't have the means. And so 9 times out of 10 on weekends when we are released, they used to call it release time. So when we are released from boarding school, I would spend it with my brother, staying with him and his landlady, who has a dog, basically.
Oh.
So I would spend that time learning English as well. So she took it upon herself to become my impromptu English teacher. So I really didn't have any friends there again, and I didn't have any acquaintances, no form of entertainment to speak of really other than just leaving the boarding school and spending time in the house over the weekend. And so coming to the U.S. Was especially challenging because it was, of course, it was the farthest of all the places from Dubai where my family lived at the time. It was also the strangest because unbeknown to me, I arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, and attended a university called Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, Florida A&M University. And it's a majority Black university. And I had no idea what that meant. No clue. Didn't even factor in the vaguest way, like as to what that could mean. But when I landed and I arrived on campus, I think there were less than 10% of the student body was not Black. It wasn't the friendliest environment because I guess I didn't look like a foreigner. I got the cold treatment. I would be in the classroom, they would be talking to each other about doing things, and I would be excluded. Nobody would talk to me. Nobody would even interact with me. I would go to the cafeteria and eat by myself all the time because nobody would sit next to me. I happened to live in a dorm. My roommate never said a word to me. Just would just come in and out and cordial, not rude or anything, but just no social interaction whatsoever. So much so that I asked to leave, and then they put me with an international student. So he was from Hong Kong, but he also had his own friends, basically. other Asian students. So it was really hard. And I remember at that time, because of course communication was much more expensive then, I was allowed by my parents to call once a month, a collect call to Dubai. And, that was really expensive. And so for that collect call, I would say most of the time crying, begging and pleading for me to leave because it was such a miserable experience. So it was really hard. And when I did eventually get a chance to go back to Dubai after about a year and a half, I was in Dubai visiting. It was only for the Christmas break. And my dad passed away during that time. And so it was the perfect opportunity for me to say, I'm not going back. And which is exactly what I did. I said, I'm not going back because I thought, I don't want to subject myself to more hardships if I go back. So I decided to just quit school altogether. And I dropped out of university for 3 years and lived in Dubai and worked in a bank.
I cannot believe this.
Yeah. After about 3 years, I was persuaded by my sisters to go back to the US and finish my education.
Dr. Houry, you dropped out.
Yeah. I dropped out of school.
Is that why you made sure I didn't? Because we have a almost exact story.
I remember. Yeah, I remember. I not only you though, every other student that has knocked on my door and talked about the possibility of dropping out, I managed to talk them out of it because it's a decision I think you will regret later on.
But our experiences were so similar that I'm a little bit shocked because, okay, so fine, I was in Georgia, you were in Florida. I thought I came to an international university, the melting pot of the world, the United States of America. And instead, I ended up in a very interesting situation where, having grown up in Africa and in the Middle East, being surrounded by so many different cultures all the time, I was in complete culture shock when I moved to Macon, as you know. But I also had a roommate that no longer wanted to live with me, and I had to find a different roommate. She just left. And I needed to learn a lot more about U.S. history, because apparently when I did my high school, even though I did international baccalaureate and did all the things that I thought were really good, we never really did U.S. history or what the politics.
We didn't either. Yeah.
And culture was like in the U.S. I thought I could be friends with anybody and everybody, but people were asking me why I'm friends with this group, why I'm friends with this group. I had an accent, and then they immediately thought I was, I don't know from where. I've been Spanish, I've been Russian, obviously, and then it meant that I was a tennis player. I mean, the amount of stereotypes that were thrown at me, and I don't even know. And yes, because my parents were living in the UAE, it was so expensive to call them. I could barely call them, but when I did, I just cried. I cried the entire time, and I didn't want to come back, obviously.
Yeah.
It was so hard. It was, when I think back to it, it's honestly traumatizing.
Yeah, I totally identify. I remember I lost a lot of weight. I was like skin and bones because I didn't enjoy eating, like in the cafeteria, eating cafeteria food alone. I mean, it's like the worst possible combination. And I had to use a bike to get everywhere. So that also meant a lot of physical activity. And when I first arrived home, my mom fainted, like literally just fell to the ground when she saw me because I looked so frail, so weak as a result of that experience.
Yeah, I did also have a moment like that at Mercer as well. Okay, so lots of challenges, obviously, which have been really difficult. It sounds like you were lonely a lot. You didn't have many friends. Actually,
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
There is a positive. There is an uptick to this, and that is the first day that I arrived, I met this person. So I grew up in a household that was not religious at all. Like, we had a bar in the house, and my dad was a drinker, so we never even talked about religion and so forth. So I arrive in the U.S. never having touched the Quran or done a prayer or anything like that. And then I check into my dorm, and it happens that the director of my dorm is an American who is African-American, but is a recent convert to Islam. He is the child of a preacher who decided in his adult years that he was going to convert to Islam. So anyway, he had just converted like about a year before we met. And so when, this is again like a majority Black university. So there's very few international students, and especially like Muslim international students, even token Muslims like me. And so when I met him, he was so excited. He was like beyond himself. He's like, "Oh, I'm meeting a Muslim who like grew up in Islam and all of this." And so, he just kept going on and on about how great it's going to be, that I was going to help him read the Quran and teach him Arabic and all that. So
Wow.
in that sense, I made a friend almost instantly. And without him, honestly, my life would have been 100 times more miserable. I mean, of course, there was a huge age gap between us, but still having that person to go to meant having occasional social events to go to, like every time the local Muslim community, and it's all African American. So I felt really awkward the first couple of times I went, but they were very welcoming, very embracing, never made me feel like a stranger in any way. So that was a huge relief, really. Made me cope in ways that I don't think I would have been otherwise be able to cope being at that institution. So it was a blessing to have met him and to have had the opportunity to engage the local community the way that I did. I even started praying as a result of that.
Yeah.
Who knew? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when we met, you were practicing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was. And that was thanks to him. He became an imam later on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's really devout and everything, but he was God sent, because without him, I think my life would have been very, very difficult, if not impossible, really, in those situations.
Wow. I mean, for me, it was kind of similar with you in the sense that I don't, if you weren't there, I wouldn't have stayed. So.
Oh, it's great. I'm glad you stayed.
Yeah, me too.
Because
me too.
look, 20 years later, we're still talking.
Yeah.
Had you not stayed, we would not be talking.
I don't know if the trauma was worth it. No, it's worth it. It's worth it for sure. Okay, so obviously there were a lot of hardships. So we've been experienced that, and I think that comes with moving, studying abroad, just changing the environment that you're really used to, that you're comfortable in, that you can rely on, to then suddenly have to pick up and start from scratch. Like you were saying, students that study abroad, they feel like they have to start from scratch and find friends and a community. When we're younger, we are more resilient. You kind of brush them off, and then you only later realize, oh, this really affected me pretty badly. But at the time when it was happening, you seem to be fine. Aside from some crying and so on, but like you don't know the effect that it has on you later on in life. I know you had this one positive, but throughout all the challenges and everything you've been through, would you say good did come out of it ultimately when you look back on your experiences? What are some challenges that you overcame, advice that you could give if somebody is going through something like that at the moment that you feel like really helped you?
I wouldn't hesitate for a second to say a ton of good came out of it. Not just good, on so many levels. On a professional level, I was able to gain a good education, get a really nice job, and love the job, love the career that I pursued, felt extremely content and fulfilled with what I was doing and how I was doing it and the impact I was having. Those are experiences that I am convinced, beyond a shadow of doubt, I would not have had anywhere else, especially not in my part of the world. If I lived in the Middle East, these experiences would be beyond my reach, way beyond my reach. So, that's just one of the positives. The other positive is I got to meet my wife. We got to have a child as a result of that. I would not have met my wife had I not been an international student. Never heard of Aruba before I met her. So we hit it off, and that worked well. So that's another really strong positive. I think another positive is that, and this sounds arrogant, but I really don't mean it that way. I'm just a different person. I think I would have had a much more difficult time living in the Middle East as a person, because my mode of thinking and my sense of values and ethics are not common in that part of the world. I'm much more accepting. I am more tolerant. I am not that they're not accepting, tolerant, but it's just not the norm over there. And being able to be independent, being able to make decisions on my own, decisions that reflect my aspirations, my dreams, my expectations, and the way I want to achieve them with very little interference. Family is wonderful, but it can also be a constraint, and especially if they feel like it's their business to tell you what to do every step of the way. So all of those, I think, were positives that came out of the opportunity to kind of grow up and mature and live your life on your own elsewhere, outside of your home country, or at least your home environment.
Actually, another angle to this question is, despite all the challenges you've experienced, you want all other students to go through it.
Well, just to get a sample of it. No, but I actually, it wasn't just my word, even though, of course, I did a lot of selling, like a study abroad to students. But I did a lot of research, and I generated all kinds of documentation showing that studying abroad is good on so many levels, as I mentioned near the introduction. There's lots of documentation in the literature about the value of study abroad on your personality, on your academic success, your professional success, on your academic performance during the years of undergraduate education and so forth. So there's a lot of positives that come out of it. Positives that are not associated with any other type of educational endeavor. So taking a course, or maybe doing an internship, or doing an externship, or whatever it is, no other experience is as transformative and genuinely impactful as studying abroad.
I've seen friends in university transform after they went to study abroad, because initially I came in and the majority of the people that I met at university had never really left the US. They'd barely left the state. And throughout the years at Mercer, when anyone had done a study abroad trip, they came back with like a new zest for life and just very excited to tell me all these stories, because initially it was just me trying to connect with them on different stories, but it couldn't.
Right.
But I could actually start connecting with people more after they did that trip.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny in a way, because it makes me laugh sometimes when I recall some of the conversations. Just after one trip, they come back and talk like they're like worldly travelers, like they have like mastered it. They can identify with you on all of those levels.
Can you tell me a little bit more about building a community and long-lasting friendships? Any advice that you may have that you feel like actually really worked for you?
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. And I think there's a lot of sort of dynamics to it. And I think it starts with the person, like me in this instance. I'm not the most social person. If you give me a choice, I would rather spend 90% of the time by myself, kind of not really missing connections or gatherings and things like that. It's just not my thing. And I would much rather like have my own time, my own space, the freedom to be able to do or not do what I want when I want. But we did make an effort when we first moved to Macon, especially after my wife moved. It took 2 years for my wife to follow me to Macon. And so when she first arrived, we had Amira, my daughter, and we decided early on, because it's an interfaith marriage. She's Catholic and I'm Muslim. So we decided that we're going to raise Amira as a Muslim, that we're going to observe Islamic occasions and obligations and things like that. And that's how we're going to raise her. And so we made a conscious effort early on to try to find the Muslim community in the Macon area. And we were lucky enough to actually find a few families, Lebanese families, that we became very close to, and to this day are very close friends to. And it was hard to leave them in Macon, after when we left recently. For the most part, it turned out that it wasn't really for us, like my wife didn't feel quite comfortable or at home in that environment. It was kind of chaotic. So despite our best efforts to try to expose Amira to these things, they were just not managed well. And so a couple of years into it, we decided to just kind of withdraw from that environment. As she got older, she started going to kindergarten. We started meeting parents and other families. And so as Amira got older, we started to make friends from school. And as she got older and got interested in different sports, karate and swimming and soccer, we started. And again, it may have been me. It may have been all my fault, but never really felt like we were close friends. We were acquaintances. We got along fine. We respected each other. We rooted for the same team. You know, we were on the same side of the sports competition every time. But beyond that, nothing ever happened. And I would hear them every now and then talk about, you know, getting together and things like that, but never really become, maybe I was expected to jump into those conversations. I'm not sure, but I was never really part of those plans that they were making outside of that particular engagement that we have. So there were a few friends, colleagues that I also got very close to. But again, there were colleagues at work that I got along with very well at work, but didn't really have almost anything to do with them after work. And over the years, when we inquired about, like, how do you make friends in Macon, you know, like when we have conversations with people, over and over again, the sentiment was, you have to belong to a church to have any sense of community. Because you know how churches are run in the U.S. They're congregations, right? And everything the church becomes the cornerstone of your social life. So your volunteer hours are with your church, your community hours are with your church, your commitments financially are to your church. So the church becomes really kind of the hub, the social hub of activity. And if you don't belong to a church, it's very difficult to find a community that you can slot into. We lived in 2 subdivisions for the duration of time that we spent in Macon, 34 years. In the first subdivision, it took us about 5 years to meet our neighbor, but we finally did meet, and we actually did exchange visits several times after that. But just one neighbor on a street of maybe 10 homes. And then in the second subdivision that we lived in for 15 years, we never met our neighbors. Not once did I actually talk to a neighbor. I see them in the grocery store, but that's it. It wasn't just me, because when I talked to my Lebanese male friends, who are also married with families, who were both physicians, they also didn't have any friendships outside of the Lebanese circle.
Interesting.
They had a lot of colleagues. They talked to a lot of colleagues all the time about work, about this, about that. But as soon as work hours are over, there was no social interaction at all with them. So I know that it wasn't just me, because the 2 other physicians that I know are very outgoing and very social. And yet they also didn't really have any kind of social connection outside of work with the people that they worked with.
Interesting.
So building community was particularly challenging.
I guess it has to do with where you move to as well. I found Macon extremely difficult. Not Atlanta so much. When I moved there, I made friends pretty quickly in Atlanta, but I had to become more American. My accent changed, everything changed. When I was younger, I sort of adapted everything, and I really wanted to fit in. I mean, I just really wanted to fit in, because I was always different everywhere I went. The little Russian kid that moved to this school or that school, English, pure English accent. I mean, all the things. And I just wanted to be like everybody else.
It's a message we tried to instill in our daughter, the same way that your parents probably tried to do. And it worked until about teenage years. And that's when things kind of fell apart, because then it was all about belonging. It was all about being one of, and, you know, being seamlessly part of a group of people who dress alike, think alike, talk alike. But yeah, I mean, she was under the same kinds of pressures.
When I look back, I really appreciate my experience, but the thing is that my experience also makes me feel lonely, because I can't really connect on the stories to anyone. And I think we've talked about this before, where if I get too excited or too deep into what I've done or anything to that effect, people switch off.
Right. Because they can't relate. Yeah. It's completely foreign to them. And so it doesn't sound interesting. It doesn't sound engaging anymore.
This one person I talked to, she said, immigrants need to be very comfortable being alone. You might become friends with people later. It might take 5 years. It might take 15 years. At some point, maybe you'll get there if you choose to. But a lot of people aren't comfortable being alone. And so I've become comfortable being alone, because before I was extremely social, very outgoing, but I feel like I got burned so many times that I really love being alone now. That's my thing. I have to, I'm kind of forced to leave the house.
Welcome to my world.
It's so much nicer.
But you're too young for that.
I'm trying. I'm trying a whole new thing.
I think your daughter is going to force you to change. You'll see.
Again.
Because, I mean, we did things, we went places, we had to be in certain places and do certain things in ways that we never imagined we could, but we did because our daughter had to do it.
If you were to do it all over again, would you recommend for someone to follow in your footsteps, or are there things you wish you shifted a little?
Yeah. It's a tough question to deal with holistically like that when you say all over again, because there are so many different parts to it.
You had too many
Some
moves.
parts, some parts I would definitely want to move, I would do again. Like, getting married, having a child, getting my degree, having the job that I did, going to study abroad, going to London and then to the US. All of that I would do all over again. There are patches in between that I would rather skip.
Mm-hmm.
And I would wish for other people to not to have to endure in the process. But I think if you look at it as a big picture, I honestly, and I guess I'm really fortunate in that sense, I don't have any regrets. I think things have turned out to be as good as I could have imagined them. It wasn't like a really tough life. It was challenging, but I overcame those challenges, which is what it's all about. Yeah.
Is that why you would tell someone else that they should move so that they can be challenged?
No, if I'm gonna tell them to move, I'm gonna tell them all the good things about moving, not the challenge part. All the opportunities, all the kinds of foods, all the kinds of people, all the kinds of cultures, all the kinds of places that they can see and experience firsthand, but not necessarily the challenges. The challenges will come in later conversations.
So then what are some of your favorite parts about having moved so many times and lived in so many different countries, continents, speaking different languages, and then I would say even finding religion, because you were not religious, but you found religion when you moved to the US. Let's end on this positive note.
I think richness and depth in life is the biggest benefit that I've been able to get out of it. There's not a place that I can go to that I don't say, it's like here, or it's like, I compare it to other places that I've been before, because I have a context. I have a framework or a point of reference that I can kind of refer back to and compare the current to the other. Just today I was talking to Amira on the phone and I was telling her about how many Filipinos and Indians there are in Malta. Every retail store is staffed by Filipinos. Every restaurant is staffed by Indians and Filipinos. It's like being in Dubai all over. I was
just going to say.
Exactly like Dubai, yeah. And in fact, I had a conversation with a Filipino just yesterday, and she was living in Dubai before she came here. I think this is the richness I'm talking about, is that I'm able to frame things in ways that mean something to me. I mean, other people may find this really dull. It's like, why are you even making those comparisons? But to me, it's really interesting because it's sort of an affirmation of a global trend. This is what I used to teach about, right? Forced migration. For labor, they call it pull migration. It's not, nobody's actually forcing you to leave, but in a way you're not given a choice in the matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like the person I was talking to yesterday hadn't seen her family in 7 years. She has children. Nobody would wish that upon themselves voluntarily. She has to do it because she must do it that way. Otherwise, her family will struggle, right? So those are the kinds of frameworks and references that I can appreciate in ways because I've been in other places. So that's the kind of depth that I'm talking about. But sometimes it's not as good because, like today I had a falafel sandwich. It was terrible. It was from a Lebanese place, so it's like, sometimes it's not great because, I couldn't even finish half of that sandwich. It didn't taste anything like falafel. Yeah. So
I miss Lebanese
sometimes
flour
it's good,
every day.
sometimes, yeah. See? So, but yeah, seriously though, I mean, I think it's, that richness of being able to have fond memories of all of these places that you visited.
Food is such a big thing.
Food is a big thing, a very big thing. Yeah.
Every time I go move somewhere, I have to find a few key places that are extremely important in my diet. One of them is Arabic food. And LA has some good Arabic food.
Oh, yeah.
I had to go through quite a few restaurants and talk to some Lebanese friends and figured out, the closest thing I can get to Lebanese flour. It's a really great Lebanese restaurant. Russian food I always look for.
Okay.
Groceries,
Good luck with
just
that.
little things. Yeah,
Yeah.
little things that I can remind me of being with my grandma. I really love Thai food. Having lived in Abu Dhabi and being only 5 hours away from Bangkok, I went to Thailand so often. I love Thai food. I love actually a lot of all Asian food, but Thai food I'm
Yeah.
very particular about. So there's always these three that I'm looking for.
Yeah. No, I like all of those cuisines, absolutely. And like Malta, we came because we were thinking, okay, this could be one of the places we could settle. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's English speaking. That's a big plus. It's mild weather, not today, but mostly mild weather. Lots of pluses. But it has a big negative that I only discovered through experience. They don't make good bread. And bread is the cornerstone of my diet.
Same.
It's like I can't live without bread. Every meal has to have bread. It doesn't matter what I'm eating. It could be before, it could be after, it could be during, but bread is essential. And really good bread is even more essential. Not very good bread here. Tasteless. Malta's like been relegated.
Oh no. Yeah. I had a
Yeah.
whole conversation yesterday with someone at Sprouts or Trader Joe's about bread as I was checking out because I had already started on the baguette and my daughter also is following in my footsteps.
That's the best part of the baguette is when you start eating it when you get it. Yeah.
Exactly. And him and I really connected on that.
Yeah. See?
Yeah. Bread is very important.
There's actually a whole series of shows. Breaking is called. Basically, it's like using bread as a way of building bridges between cultures because it's such a universal feature of almost every society on the planet to have some kind of bread, some better than others, but still you can relate across the board when you talk about bread.
You know, in Italy, I don't remember if it's north or south, but they don't put a lot of salt in their bread.
Yes,
Can't eat
this
it.
is the problem here. That's exactly the problem, Alina, is because Malta is under the influence of Italy. Sicily is only an hour ferry ride
Okay.
from Malta, and Italian influence is everywhere. Every other restaurant is a pizza place. Every other restaurant is an Italian place, right? So Italian influence is pervasive here. Their bread does not have salt, and that's the problem.
I know my bread.
We know our bread. It has to have a little bit of salt for flavor.
Yeah. Where is the next place you're going to?
I've been to Antalya like 4 times already. I mean, Turkish food, of course, is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to that. Antalya is a medium-sized city. It's not, especially this time of year, it's not crowded at all.
Oh, that's
so it's
nice.
a really good time to be there. And it's easy access to other kind of places on the southern coast of Turkey. So there's always some things to go see and enjoy.
I've never been to Turkey. I've only been through the airport in Istanbul.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's your next vacation.
For sure. When I decide to travel with a toddler, that will be never. If you enjoyed this conversation, pass it along to someone who might appreciate it too. Thanks for listening.